The starry void of the Gamma sector was never silent, despite the vacuum of space. Electromagnetic whispers filled the cosmos, a symphony of distant pulsars and the soft hum of the trade ship, Orion's Plight, coasting through the cold dark. On the bridge, the low thrum of the engine mixed with the crisp clatter of keyboards and the occasional murmur of the crew. It was a sound that seasoned Captain Elias Rourke likened to a whispered prelude before a storm. Elias, a man whose features were as rugged as the asteroids dotting the sector, stared out the panoramic viewports. His eyes, a sharp contrast to the soft glow of distant galaxies, were fixed on a nebula blooming like a ghostly flower in the void. He savored the silence, well aware it was the calm before chaos. "Captain, all systems green. We're on course and on schedule," reported Lieutenant Harlan, his voice breaking the quiet like a stone through glass. Harlan, though a side character in the grand cosmos, carried an aura of steady competence that filled the small spaces of the ship's routine. Elias nodded, his hand absent-mindedly tracing the rim of the command console, feeling the cool metal under his fingertips. "Keep an eye on the scanners, Harlan. Pirates have been thick as thieves around here." As if on cue, the ship's alarm blared, a piercing sound that sliced through the humdrum, sending a jolt through the crew. The digital display flickered violently, projecting a holographic image of 3 unidentified ships rapidly closing in. "Pirates!" shouted Harlan, his voice a mix of alarm and adrenaline. "They're coming in fast, Captain. Looks like they're armed to the teeth." Elias's response was swift and measured, his commands slicing through the air with practiced ease. "Red alert! All hands! Battle stations! Harlan, initiate evasive maneuvers. We're not letting them take us without a fight." The ship lurched violently under Harlan's skilled yet frantic manipulation of the controls. As he orchestrated a dance of desperate evasions, the stars outside transformed into elongated streaks of light, each one a fleeting ghost in the cold void. Inside, the cacophony of the crew's shouts rebounded off the narrow metal corridors, mixing with the sharp, metallic clanks of rapid footsteps and the electric hiss of sliding doors sealing off compromised sections. The atmosphere thickened with the tang of ozone, a byproduct of the ship's defense systems surging to life. Panels along the corridor lit up with the stark white light of combat readiness, casting long shadows behind the running crew members, their faces set in grim determination. Outside, the serenity of the black void was violently shattered by an eruption of laser fire. The beams, red and merciless, cut through the darkness with terrifying precision. The first volley struck the Orion's Plight with the force of a cosmic hammer. The ship's shields flared brilliantly upon impact, a sudden bright halo that flickered and waned under the assault. The resulting shockwave sent a deep, bone-jarring tremor through the hull, the sound a deafening roar that seemed to consume all other noises. Inside the ship, the impact resonated like a bell toll in Elias's ears, the taste of fear acrid and sharp on his tongue. Vibrations from the hit traveled through the floor and into the soles of his boots, a constant reminder of their peril. The air crackled with static, a prickling against the skin of the crew as they braced for the next assault. As Elias steadied himself against the navigation console, his eyes fixed on the external monitors showing the enemy ships. They maneuvered with a predatory grace, their hulls scarred and pitted from countless skirmishes. Each laser strike painted a stark portrait of desperation and danger, casting eerie shadows that danced across the faces of Elias and his crew. Another round of fire burst from the pirate ships, each beam a column of seething destruction intent on swallowing the Orion's Plight whole. The ship shuddered under the relentless barrage, systems flickering as power fluctuated wildly. Sparks erupted from a nearby panel, showering Elias with a brief cascade of bright embers, the smell of burning insulation momentarily overpowering the scent of ozone. Elias, face set in a mask of resolve, shouted orders over the din. "Divert all power to forward shields. Brace for impact." His voice carried the weight of command, each word slicing through the chaos with urgent clarity. The crew responded with a flurry of activity, rerouting energy, bolstering defenses, their movements a testament to their training and their captain's indomitable will. Outside, the universe seemed to hold its breath as beams and shields collided, a silent testament to the brutal ballet of space warfare. Each explosion outside the hull was a starburst of light that illuminated the void, a fleeting beauty born from violence and necessity. "We've got breaches in sectors 7 and 9, hull integrity at 76% and dropping," one of the engineers yelled from his post, panic threading his voice as the ship rocked under the assault. Elias clenched his fists, the metallic scent of blood filling the air as he felt a shard from the console nick his skin. "Patch it up, keep her moving. Fire all cannons. Aim for their propulsion." Through the chaos, Elias's eyes caught a fleeting glimpse of the attackers. Their ships were grotesque, cobbled together from parts of other vessels, like predators evolved through the cruel necessity of space piracy. Their leader's ship, larger and more menacing, bore down on them, its cannons glowing hot with impending fire. "Captain, they're hailing us," Harlan called out, his face illuminated by the soft blue of the comm screen. On the screen, the pirate leader appeared, his face scarred and twisted with malice. "Surrender your cargo and your passengers and we might let you live," he hissed, his voice oily with deceit. Elias's reply was cold, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "This ship carries children, innocents. You'll have to get through me first." The pirate laughed, a sound devoid of humor and filled with dark promise. "So be it." The battle raged, a maelstrom of laser fire and twisted metal. Elias fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his ship weaving through the deadly ballet of combat. Each explosion was a thunderclap, each maneuver a dance on the razor's edge. But the pirates were relentless. With a final devastating strike, they crippled the Orion's plight, boarding the vessel with the ease of a knife through cloth. The sounds of fighting were close now, the clash of bodies and the desperate shouts of his crew. Elias stood firm as the pirates burst onto the bridge, their guns raised and their eyes hungry for victory. He knew he was outnumbered, the metallic taste of defeat bitter on his lips. Yet, as he looked at his captors, he felt a surge of defiance. "You may take us, but you won't break us," he declared, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent bridge. The pirate leader approached, a grin spreading across his scarred face. "Oh, I don't intend to break you. I intend to sell you." As Elias was forced to his knees, his gaze fell on the viewport, where the nebula still bloomed, beautiful and serene. It was a cruel juxtaposition to the violence inside the ship, a reminder of the galaxy's indifferent beauty. And as he was dragged away, Elias whispered a vow. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." And somewhere in the depths of space, the cosmos whispered back, a silent promise of revenge woven into the fabric of the stars. As Elias was forcibly dragged down the narrow, dimly lit corridors of his own ship, the cold metal of the deck plates numbed his knees. Around him, the muffled sounds of his crew's resistance thinned as the pirates efficiently subdued the Orion's plight. Elias's nostrils flared, catching the acidic stench of burning circuitry mixed with the more acrid scent of fear and sweat. His vision blurred with a cocktail of rage and helplessness, but within him a fierce resolve smoldered. The pirate leader, a hulking figure named Crowell, with a visage marred by past battles, shoved Elias into a cramped makeshift brig. "Enjoy your stay, Captain," Crowell sneered, his voice oozing contempt. The clang of the heavy steel door echoed in Elias's ears, a somber bell tolling for lost freedom. Back on Earth, the news of the Orion's plight's capture streaked across the holonets like wildfire. In the Strategic Command Center buried beneath the lunar surface, General Nathan Harrow monitored the situation with a steely gaze. The room buzzed with the urgent movements of officers and analysts, a beehive disturbed by an imminent threat. General Harrow, a tall figure clad in military decorum, stood rigidly before a massive display. His eyes, deep set under furrowed brows, reflected the gravity of the unfolding crisis. "Status report," he barked, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter like a sharp blade. "Sir, the Orion's plight was seized in the Gamma sector. Pirates used advanced jamming technology to blindside them. We've lost all communications post-abduction," reported Commander Lin, a veteran space tactician who maintained an air of calm despite the urgency. Harrow's jaw clenched. "Options, Commander. I need options, not excuses." Lynn nodded, tapping rapidly at his console to bring up tactical simulations. "We could deploy the Fifth Fleet to intercept. They're the closest asset with a jump drive capable of reaching the sector within 3 hours." Harrow pondered, his finger tracing the rim of his coffee mug, the bitter aroma mingling with the scent of ozone prevalent in the command center. "Prepare the Fifth Fleet, but keep them on standby. I want a special ops team assembled first, small, fast, and silent. We play this smart, or we risk sparking an interstellar incident." Meanwhile, on a ship lurking in the shadow of a nearby asteroid, Elias struggled against his restraints, the metallic tang of his own blood filling his mouth. The brig was suffocating, lit only by a flickering light that cast ghostly shadows on the walls. Each creak and groan of the ship seemed to taunt him, a constant reminder of his crew's peril. Outside the brig, Crowell communicated with his superiors via a secure channel. "The cargo is secured and the humans are contained," he reported, his voice a harsh whisper. "Instructions?" The response was a distorted garble, but the intent was clear. "Hold until the ransom is paid. No harm to the cargo. The humans are more valuable alive." Crowell ended the transmission, his eyes glinting with greed. This was more than a simple raid. It was a strategic move in a larger game, the full scope of which Elias could only guess. Back on Earth, Harrow assembled his response team. Among them was Specialist Jack Mason, a covert operative known for his unorthodox methods and deep cover operations. Mason's reputation was as solid as the titanium alloy of the ship he would command. "Your mission is to infiltrate the pirate ship, extract the hostages, and gather any intelligence on their operations," Harrow briefed, his voice firm, carrying the weight of each word like a physical burden. Mason nodded, his eyes scanning the detailed star maps and schematics displayed. "We'll get them out, sir. Stealth and precision," he affirmed, the promise ringing clear. As Mason's team prepared, loading up on gear that whispered death in the silent void of space, Elias sat in the darkness of his cell, listening to the distant echoes of his ship being plundered. He closed his eyes, focusing on the faint vibrations through the ship's hull, each one a potential sign of hope or a prelude to deeper despair. Mason's ship, the Phantom, cut through space like a blade, its engines humming a low, almost inaudible thrum. The team was silent, each member mentally rehearsing their role in the upcoming operation. Their approach was cloaked in both technology and the blackness of space, invisible to all but the most sophisticated sensors. As they neared the pirate ship, Mason reviewed the plan one last time. "In and out, no heroics. We're shadows, we're ghosts. We strike, and then we vanish." The Phantom docked silently with the pirate vessel, the seal between them as soft as a traitor's promise. Mason and his team slipped through the airlock, their movements fluid and precise. Inside, the ship was a labyrinth of corridors and bulkheads, but Mason navigated them with the confidence of a man walking through his own home. Each step brought them closer to the brig, where Elias and his crew awaited, their fates hanging in the balance. Mason's senses were on high alert, the smell of oil and stale air pervasive as they moved deeper into the pirate ship. Each shadow could conceal a threat, every noise was a potential alarm. And above them all, the silent stars watched, eternal witnesses to the struggles of lesser beings, their light cold and distant, yet somehow comforting in the unyielding dark. Mason's team advanced stealthily through the dimly lit corridors of the pirate vessel, each member's senses heightened to the oppressive silence that draped like a shroud over the ship. The cold metallic walls bore the scars of skirmishes past, pockmarked and dented, whispering tales of violence and desperation. The air was stale, thick with the tang of oil and the undercurrent of sweat and fear, a testament to the ship's notorious legacy. As they neared the brig, Mason signaled his team to halt with a raised hand, his eyes scanning for any sign of the enemy. The only sound was the soft hiss of the ship's life support systems, breathing artificial life into the steel beast. His nostrils flared as he detected a faint, almost imperceptible odor, a sharp, chemical tang that suggested recent weapon discharge. "Perimeter secure," hissed Tara, the team's communications expert, her voice barely a whisper in the comlink. Her presence was like a shadow, felt more than seen, as she kept her eyes on the flickering screens of her handheld scanner. Mason nodded, his gaze fixed on the security panel beside the brig's door. With deft fingers, he bypassed the lock, a soft click echoing in the confined space like the tick of a clock at midnight. Gently, he pushed the door open, peering inside with eyes narrowed against the dim light that spilled from the cell. Inside, Elias stood up swiftly, his eyes meeting Mason's. A silent exchange passed between them, a mutual recognition of the gravity of their situation. Mason's gaze briefly flickered to Elias's bruised face, and the resolve etched deeply upon it. "We're getting you out," Mason murmured, stepping inside. His team followed, spreading out with practiced ease, covering the angles. "Not without my crew," Elias responded immediately, his voice firm, the steely edge of command undiminished by his captivity. Mason's nod was curt. "We'll take everyone, but move quietly. We're not out yet." As they ushered Elias and his crew out of the cell, the faint hum of the pirate ship seemed to grow louder, as if the vessel itself sensed the escape. Mason led the way, his steps silent on the cold metal floor, his senses continually scanning for any change in the ambient noise or air movement that might suggest they were no longer alone. The team moved like phantoms back through the corridors they had come, the tension among them palpable. Every shadow could conceal a threat, every turn might bring them face to face with their adversaries. The ship creaked ominously, the sound of settling metal like the groan of some great beast stirring in its sleep. Without warning, the quiet was shattered by the sharp bark of an alarm, slicing through the corridors with the piercing intensity of a star-going supernova. Red lights flashed, bathing the stark metal walls in a sinister glow. Mason's curse was a soft growl, lost in the sudden chaos. "This way," he commanded, leading the group toward an alternate route he'd mapped out earlier. Their pace quickened, the sound of their hurried footsteps a staccato rhythm against the throbbing alarm. Behind them, the sound of shouting voices and running footsteps grew louder. The pirates roused like a hornet's nest, poked by an unwary hand. Mason glanced back, his eyes meeting those of his team members, each glance a silent vow to protect their charges at all costs. They ducked into a service tunnel, the cramped space forcing them to move in a single file. The walls here were close, the air cooler, the tang of metal more pronounced. Mason's hand signals were crisp in the semi-darkness, each movement precise and clear. As they neared what Mason hoped would be their exit, the shrill clatter of approaching footsteps echoed down the tunnel behind them. He signaled a halt, turning to face the threat, his weapon ready. "Stand back," he whispered to Elias and his crew, pushing them gently but firmly toward the relative safety of a narrow alcove. Tara and another team member, Jax, took positions on either side of the tunnel, their weapons drawn, faces set in grim determination. The tension was a tangible thing, thick as the steel walls that surrounded them. The enemy appeared suddenly, bursting around the corner with the reckless momentum of a comet. The firefight was brief but intense, the confined space amplifying every sound, every shouted command, and every cry of pain. When the smoke cleared, Mason's team stood victorious, though the air was heavy with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Quickly they regrouped, Mason's eyes scanning his team for injuries. "We need to move, now," Mason said, the urgency clear in his voice. The sound of more footsteps, distant but drawing closer, spurred them into motion once again. As they finally emerged from the service tunnel, the sight that greeted them was not the freedom of space but a barricade, manned by pirates, their weapons trained on the tunnel exit. Mason's heart sank, but his face remained impassive, his mind racing through options. But then a new sound filled the air, not the expected blare of weapons but a deep resonant hum. Above them the silhouette of a massive ship blotted out the stars, its identity clear from the insignia emblazoned on its hull. It was the Fifth Fleet, arrived not a moment too soon, their powerful weapons forcing the pirates into a hasty retreat. Relief washed over Mason in a palpable wave. the tension draining away like atmosphere venting into space. As they were escorted aboard the fleet's flagship, Elias placed a firm hand on Mason's shoulder, his gratitude evident even in his exhaustion. "Thank you," he said simply, the weight of those words immense in the silence that followed. Mason nodded, allowing himself a brief smile. "Just part of the job," he replied, though his eyes, bright with the reflection of the starlight, told of the fierce pride he took in their success. But as the fleet set course back to Earth, Mason's gaze turned thoughtful, staring into the depths of space. The rescue might be over, but the mystery of who had tipped off the pirates and why remained unanswered. And beyond the stars, unseen and unknown, new threats gathered, their motives as dark as the void itself. As the Fifth Fleet cut through the cosmos, its sleek hulls reflecting the shimmering stars, Elias and Mason stood on the observation deck of the flagship, their gazes fixed on the receding pirate ship now held in a tractor beam. The atmosphere between them was charged, a mixture of relief and unresolved tension thickening the air. "Who do you think tipped them off?" Elias asked, his voice low, barely rising above the hum of the ship. His eyes, sharp and searching, reflected the nebulae swirling in the deep space beyond the glass. Mason's response was thoughtful, his brow furrowed as he considered the possibilities. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. Someone high up is playing games, and we're the pawns." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Harrow, who approached with a stern gait. His face was a mask of concern etched with lines of fatigue. "We've intercepted communications between the pirates and an unknown source on Mars. Seems your abduction wasn't just for ransom, it was a diversion." Elias's fist clenched at his side, his nails digging into his palm. "A diversion for what?" "That's what we need to find out," Harrow replied, his voice firm. "And we need to find out fast. Our intel suggests a bigger plot is unfolding, one that could threaten the stability of the entire sector." The next hours were a flurry of activity. Mason's team, along with Elias, pored over intercepted data streams and communications logs, the digital content sprawling across their screens like the web of some vast, unseen spider. Each thread they tugged seemed to unravel more of the complex tapestry of deceit and intrigue that had ensnared them. Meanwhile, the engineers and techs on board worked to trace the source of the leak to Mars, their fingers flying over keyboards, eyes squinting at lines of code that scrolled past in relentless streams. The scent of ozone and hot circuitry filled the cramped tech room, mingling with the faint odor of stale coffee that seemed permanently embedded in the air. As Mason and Elias delved deeper into the data, a pattern began to emerge, one involving covert shipments of weapons and illegal tech flowing into and out of the Martian colonies. "Looks like someone's been arming the Martian separatists," Mason muttered, his eyes narrowing at the screen. Elias leaned closer, his gaze intense. "And using my ship as a decoy to cover their tracks. We need to warn Earth." Communication lines to Earth were opened, and the urgency of their message cut through the bureaucratic red tape that usually hampered such exchanges. High-ranking officials in the Earth Defense Command were briefed, their faces grim and attentive as they appeared on the holographic display. "We're stepping up security protocols and initiating a full investigation into the Martian colonies," one of the admirals announced, his voice echoing slightly in the vast emptiness of space that surrounded them. "We'll get to the bottom of this." But Mason knew that finding the traitor would not be easy. Too many shadows lurked in the corners of human space, too many secrets hid in the silence between stars. As the flagship of the Fifth Fleet made its way back to Earth, the mood among the crew was a blend of vigilance and determination. Elias, though grateful for the safety of his crew, could not shake the chill that had settled in his bones. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, and now he too was caught in the web of galactic politics and shadow wars. One evening, as the ship sailed through a particularly dense field of star debris, the light from distant suns glinted off the particles, casting a ballet of light and shadow across the observation deck. Elias stood there watching the dance of light, his thoughts adrift among the stars. Suddenly the ship shuddered violently. a harsh reminder of the perilous nature of their journey. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as Mason rushed onto the deck, his expression taut with concern. "We're under attack," he shouted over the din of the alarms. "Unknown vessels emerging from the asteroid field." As battle stations were manned and the crew prepared to defend the ship, Elias and Mason hurried to the command center. The large view screens showed sleek, dark ships slicing through space toward them, their designs unfamiliar and menacing. "Pirates again?" Elias questioned, his voice edged with tension. "Worse," Mason replied, his gaze fixed on the incoming ships. "These aren't just scavengers. Look at the formation, the technology. These are military-grade vessels." The battle that ensued was fierce and unyielding. Mason and Elias worked side by side, coordinating the fleet's defenses, issuing commands with calm precision amidst the chaos. The flagship's cannons roared, sending fiery trails of destruction toward the attackers, each explosion illuminating the void like a new dawn. Amidst the tumult, a realization dawned on Elias, cold and clear as the space around them. This was no random skirmish. It was a message, a demonstration of power meant to test their defenses and resolve. As the last of the enemy ships retreated, beaten back by the relentless fire of the Fifth Fleet, Mason turned to Elias, his eyes alight with a fierce determination. "This isn't over," he said, his voice resolute. "It's just beginning." And as the stars watched silently from the heavens, the Fifth Fleet, scarred but unbroken, continued its journey home, the shadows of unseen enemies stretching long and dark across their path. As the last enemy ship warped into the void, a heavy silence settled over the Fifth Fleet's flagship. The crew's relief was palpable, but so too was their tension. Each member remained alert, their senses tingling with anticipation and the residue of adrenaline. Outside the reinforced windows, stars glinted against the cosmos, their light seeming to flicker with the aftermath of the battle. Inside the command center, General Harrow stood by the holographic map, his eyes scanning the sectors. His posture was rigid, the set of his jaw firm. "Mason, status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of impending decisions. Mason approached, his steps measured, his mind racing with scenarios. "We repelled the attack, but it was a close call. Those ships were unlike any pirate tech we've seen. This suggests a significant military backing, possibly rogue elements from the Martian colonies." Elias, who had been observing the exchange from the sidelines, chimed in, his voice tinged with urgency. "We need to consider the possibility of an inside job. Someone with access to our operational plans could be orchestrating this." Harrow nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Agreed. I'll arrange a security audit of all personnel with clearance. In the meantime, Elias, I want you and Mason to head to Mars. If there's a nest there, it needs to be routed before they strike again." The journey to Mars was conducted under the cloak of stealth technology. The ship's engines hummed softly, more a whisper than a roar as it sliced through space. Inside, the mood was somber, reflective of the mission's gravity. Mason spent long hours poring over intelligence reports, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his concentrated face. Elias, meanwhile, prepared for ground operations, checking and rechecking their gear. The scent of lubricant and metal filled the air, mingling with the faint odor of recycled oxygen that permeated the ship. As they neared the red planet, the ship's sensors picked up anomalous readings. "We've got company," Mason murmured, peering at the display. The blip on the screen was subtle but unmistakable, a ship hiding on the dark side of one of Mars' moons. "Looks like we were expected," Elias noted, his voice cool but tense. With a nod, Mason initiated evasive maneuvers, the ship banking sharply, the G-force pressing them firmly into their seats. The silent approach had failed. Now, speed and surprise were their remaining assets. The Martian landscape loomed large as they descended, the red dust swirling like ancient spirits, disturbed. Mason piloted the lander towards an unmarked plain, a location remote enough to avoid immediate detection but close enough to their target, an industrial facility suspected of being the front for the Separatists' arms dealings. The lander touched down with a soft thud, the dust settling around it like a cloak. Elias and Mason disembarked, their boots crunching on the coarse, iron-rich soil. The air was thin, carrying a biting chill that seeped through their suits. They approached the facility under the cover of Mars's two moons, their shadows long and distorted on the rocky ground. The building loomed ahead, a monolith of steel and glass that reflected the stark, unforgiving landscape. Using a compact laser cutter, Elias silently sliced through the lock on a side entrance, the smell of burning metal sharp in their nostrils. They slipped inside, the change in atmosphere immediate. The air was warmer, tinged with the smell of oil and machinery. The interior was dimly lit, vast, and echoed with the distant sounds of machinery. Mason's hand signals directed them through the corridors, each turn taking them deeper into the heart of the facility. As Elias kept vigilant, his gaze sweeping across the shadowed corridors leading to the central data hub, the subtle whir of Mason's hacking device was the only sound that filled the tense air. Their objective was within reach, with each flickering light of the device marking progress through the facility's fortified network. The room itself buzzed with the soft, mechanical breaths of servers and data units, each encased in sleek black racks that lined the walls. Rows of green and blue LEDs punctuated the darkness, casting an eerie glow that danced lightly across Mason's focused expression. Elias, his posture rigid and alert, stood near the only entrance, his weapon held in a firm grip. His eyes darted to every shadow, every small movement, an echo in the vast sea of data. His ears, tuned to the slightest deviation from the room's steady hum, caught a sound, a series of light, hurried footsteps approaching. The rhythm was inconsistent, suggesting urgency and a hint of stealth. Elias's hand subtly motioned towards Mason, a silent signal to prepare for possible confrontation. Mason acknowledged with a slight nod, his hands continuing their work, but his body slightly tensed, ready to react. As the footsteps grew louder, Elias tightened his hold on his weapon, his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash at the first sign of threat. The light from the corridor began to shift, a silhouette turning the corner sharply, the figure outlined briefly against the dim light. The figure was smaller, less imposing than expected. A woman, her uniform crisp but worn in places that suggested long hours of work. Her badge, illuminated briefly by the overhead light, bore the insignia of the facility, confirming her as an employee rather than a wandering threat. Her eyes, wide with shock and her mouth slightly agape, met Elias's steely gaze. She halted abruptly, her breath caught in a silent gasp, her body rigid as if prepared for a blow. Elias maintained his aim, but lowered the intensity of his posture slightly, indicating he wasn't going to shoot immediately, but was still on high alert. "Identify yourself," he commanded, his voice low but clear, slicing through the tension. The woman, recovering from her initial shock, straightened slightly, her hands raised in a universal sign of non-aggression. "I'm Dr. Lena Voss," she introduced herself quickly, her voice a mix of fear and resolve. "I work here in logistics and communications. I know why you're here. I've seen the shipments, the orders that didn't make sense, too heavy for the official records. I can help you." Her offer hung in the air, punctuated by the continued soft clicking of Mason's device as it worked through the last barriers of the facility's data security. Elias kept his weapon trained on her, his expression unreadable but his mind racing through the possibilities her cooperation presented. Could she be trusted, or was this another layer of the trap? Deciding her immediate cooperation could be valuable, he made a swift decision. "Talk fast," he urged, not lowering his gun but nodding to Mason to indicate they should keep the download running. "Start with what you know about the shipments." As she began to speak, her words spilling out in a nervous but clear stream, Mason's device beeped softly, indicating the completion of the download. They now had the data they needed, but Dr. Voss's insights could prove invaluable in deciphering it. "Don't make a sound," Elias warned, his voice low, his gun steady in his hand. The woman nodded, fear evident in her eyes, but a flicker of understanding too. "I won't," she whispered back. "I know why you're here. I can help." Mason glanced at Elias, a silent conversation passing between them. Time was of the essence. and any additional information was valuable. "Talk," Mason urged. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "The facility is a front. They've been arming the separatists, using shipments disguised as machinery parts. I have access codes to their inventory logs, shipment schedules. I can get you more information, but we must hurry." As Mason returned to the hacking device to expedite the download, Elias kept his weapon trained on the woman, though his stance softened slightly. Her offer of help could be a trap, but it was a risk they had to take. As the device finally signaled the completion of the download, a new layer of data unfolding before them on the screen, the stakes of their mission became even clearer. What had started as a simple rescue had spiraled into a web of conspiracy and rebellion that could ignite the entire solar system. With Dr. Lena Voss's rapid, urgent whispers filling the dimly lit room, Mason quickly transferred the downloaded data onto a secure drive. Each word she uttered painted a darker picture of the conspiracy unfolding within the Martian colonies. Her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination as she disclosed the locations and times of secretive off-the-record shipments that could potentially arm a rebellion. Elias, still keeping a cautious aim on her, listened intently, processing every piece of information while keeping his senses sharp to the environment. The hum of servers provided a steady backdrop to Voss's detailed descriptions of clandestine activities, her voice occasionally drowned out by the whirring of cooling systems cycling on and off. "Now, if you can get to the communication logs in the admin wing," Voss continued, pointing towards a schematic displayed on her holopad, "you'll find proof of orders directly from high-ranking officials, proof that could link back to Earth." Mason nodded, pocketing the secure drive with a soft click. "Lead the way, but remember, any sign of a double cross, and this ends quickly for you," he cautioned, his voice low but clear. As the secure door slid open, the trio stepped into the admin wing, their senses assaulted by the contrast between the musty corridor and the room's charged atmosphere. The air inside felt cooler, laden with the weight of unspoken secrets and the ghostly presence of rushed, abandoned work. Overhead, emergency lights cast a pallid, intermittent glow that barely touched the edges of the expansive room, creating a play of light and shadow that flickered across the walls and the sparse furniture. The room itself was a large, open-plan area, designed for efficiency, but now bearing the marks of hasty evacuation. Desks were arranged in neat rows, but the usual orderliness was disrupted by stacks of papers and folders that lay scattered, some spilling onto the floor, their contents a jumble of numbers and coded messages. Each desk hosted a terminal, the screens of some still alive with blinking cursors on paused screens, as if waiting for their operators to return at any moment. The soft hum of dormant equipment filled the room, a reminder that the facility was on standby, alert and waiting. The walls, lined with old, faded posters depicting Martian landscapes and corporate achievements, seemed to watch over the room with a disapproving gaze. Near the far end of the room, a large digital wall screen, which should have displayed schedules and announcements, now showed only static, its flickering light casting eerie, dancing shadows that played over the faces of Mason, Elias, and Voss as they moved cautiously inward. Mason noted the security cameras nestled in the upper corners of the room, their lenses dark, but possibly still recording. He pointed them out to Elias, who nodded and gestured for Voss to stay out of their direct line of sight. As they advanced through the room, their boots kicked up puffs of dust, disturbing the long-settled silence. The scent of aged paper mixed with the metallic tang of the electronics, creating a dry, sterile aroma that hung heavily around them. Each workstation they passed offered a glimpse into the hurried moments before evacuation. A coffee cup lay overturned, its dried contents stained into the papers below. A holographic photo frame flickered intermittently, showing glimpses of happier times, perhaps moments of celebration among the staff. Voss led them to a secluded terminal at the back of the room, more isolated and surrounded by higher partitions than the others. "It was here," she explained with a hushed tone, "that sensitive communications were handled, away from the casual prying of routine work." The terminal's screen was dark, and she set about waking it from its powered-down state, her fingers nimbly dancing over the keys, the soft clacking sounds oddly loud in the oppressive silence of the admin wing. Mason and Elias entered, sweeping the room with their eyes and weapons, alert for any movement. "Check the logs," Mason directed Elias, who moved to a terminal and began the interface sequence. Suddenly, the soft clattering of something small hitting the floor made them all whip around. A shadow flitted at the edge of their vision, quick and barely perceptible. Voss's eyes widened in alarm, and Elias instinctively tightened his grip on his weapon. "It's just the ventilation system," Voss whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "It's old. It does that." Mason gave her a long, hard stare, then turned back to the task at hand, his senses still on high alert. As Elias accessed the communications logs, the screen flooded with data, rows upon rows of encrypted messages waiting to be deciphered. The work was tedious, each entry needing to be carefully checked against known codes and ciphers. As Mason watched over Elias's shoulder, the ambient noise of the facility seemed to crescendo around them, the sounds of their high-stakes espionage mingling with the ghostly echoes of the building's mechanical size. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, and as Elias finally broke through the last layer of encryption, the screen displayed a series of communications detailing covert operations and funding transfers from untraceable sources. "Got something," Elias muttered, his voice tense. "Looks like we've got high-ranking officials involved," just as Voss said. The revelation was a heavy weight in the room, pressing down on them with the gravity of its implications. Mason turned to Voss, who met his gaze steadily, her earlier fear now replaced with a grim resolution. "We need to get this information to General Harrow immediately," Mason decided, his voice resolute. "Every minute we wait, the deeper the conspiracy grows." Just as they prepared to leave, the facility shuddered violently, dust falling from the ceiling as the dull roar of engines sounded from above. They rushed to the window in time to see several dark figures rappelling down from stealth ships that had silently encircled the facility. "They've found us," Elias said, his voice grim. "Looks like our presence here didn't go unnoticed." Mason clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "We hold them off as long as we can. Voss, you're with us. Your knowledge of this place is invaluable." As the first of the attackers breached the perimeter, Mason, Elias, and Voss prepared for a fight. The dim, flickering light of the admin wing was now their battleground, the stakes, life or death. Outside, the Martian sky turned a deeper shade of crimson, mirroring the chaos below. The scent of ozone intensified as energy weapons charged, and the first shots rang out, echoing through the empty halls with the sharp clarity of breaking glass. Each blast, each movement was a desperate bid for time. Time to expose the truth hidden within the walls of this forsaken Martian facility. The air crackled with tension as Elias, Mason, and Dr. Voss huddled around the now active terminal at the back of the admin wing. As Voss keyed in the last of her access codes, the screen flickered to life, revealing layers of encrypted data. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, decrypting files with practiced ease. The soft hum of the computer's fan blended with the distant sounds of gunfire, a stark reminder of the siege happening just outside their temporary sanctuary. Mason kept watch by the door, his eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor for any signs of approaching danger. The echo of his own breathing, amplified by the tension, filled his ears, mingling with the distant muffled explosions that shook the facility intermittently. The acrid scent of burnt electronics wafted through the air, a constant reminder of the battle outside. Elias, meanwhile, focused on the screen, absorbing the influx of information that could potentially dismantle the burgeoning rebellion. "What's our best route for extraction?" he asked, his voice a calm contrast to the chaos unfurling around them. "We have an old service tunnel not monitored by regular security protocols. It should lead us out near the eastern docking bays," Voss explained, highlighting the route on a facility map displayed on the screen. Her pointer traced the path they would take, the line glowing faintly blue against the layout of the complex. "Let's move," Mason decided, his voice carrying the weight of command. They gathered their limited gear, and Voss shut down the terminal, erasing their digital footprint with a few swift commands. The trio made their way through the winding corridors of the facility, their path lit only by the occasional emergency light that flickered overhead. The walls, cold and unyielding, seemed to close in on them as they moved, the silence punctuated only by the distant sounds of the ongoing conflict. As they stepped into the ship, the chill of the unheated cargo hold greeted them, a stark reminder of the vessel's utilitarian purpose. The air was stale and carried a faint metallic tang, mingling with the residual odors of machinery oil and old cargo. The only light came from the small overhead bulbs, which cast a sparse clinical glow over the hold's contents, crates and containers secured with netting, their labels faded and edges dusted with the red Martian sand. Mason led the way, his boots echoing softly against the steel floor, the sound sharp in the otherwise hushed environment. He moved with a cautious precision, his eyes scanning the shadows that clung to the corners of the hold, where darkness pooled beneath the scant light. Reaching the ship's control panel, he paused, his fingers hovering over the interface. With a few swift, deliberate movements, he disabled the remaining security protocols, a small bead of sweat trailing down his temple, a subtle testament to the tension they all felt. The ship's door slid shut with a definitive hiss, sealing them inside. The sound reverberated off the metal walls, briefly overpowering the hum of the ship's awakening systems. They navigated through the narrow passageway leading to the cockpit, the walls lined with conduit and the occasional flickering light panel, the space growing tighter, more intimate. Elias settled into the pilot's seat, his body molding into its contours. He adjusted the straps with a practiced hand, then began the startup sequence. The dashboard lit up, bathing his face in a cool blue light that reflected his concentrated gaze. His fingers danced across the touchscreens, bringing systems online one by one: navigation, life support, communications. Each beep and chirp of the console was a step closer to freedom, a lifeline pulling them towards safety. As the engines warmed up, their low thrum growing steadier, stronger, the ship vibrated gently, a comforting purr that resonated through the floor and into their feet. Outside, the docking clamps disengaged with a series of mechanical clunks, each one echoing through the ship like a heartbeat. The vessel began to drift, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, as Elias manipulated the controls with calm expertise. The view from the cockpit windows shifted, the stark, barren landscape of Mars receding as they ascended. The planet's crimson hue bled into the blackness of space, its rugged terrain a silent witness to their escape. The atmosphere thinned, stars began to pierce the velvet darkness, and the weight of gravity lessened, a tangible release of the burdens they had carried on the ground. As they broke free from Mars's gravitational pull, Elias set their course for Earth, the coordinates a beacon in the vast ocean of space. The ship steadied into its trajectory, the engines settling into a quiet hum, the promise of home now just a journey away. As they cleared the Martian atmosphere, the vastness of space enveloped them, the stars shining with indifferent brilliance against the black canvas of the universe. Elias set a course for Earth, the coordinates a string of hope displayed brightly against the ship's navigation screen. "We should prepare the data for transmission," Voss suggested, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but the fatigue was evident in her posture as she slumped slightly against the bulkhead. Mason nodded, retrieving the secure drive. "Once we're clear of any potential intercepts, we'll send everything to General Harrow," he confirmed, plugging the drive into the ship's communication console. The data transmission was a beacon, slicing through the void towards Earth. Each packet of information carried with it the weight of their discovery, the potential to alter the course of conflicts brewing silently among the stars. As they neared Earth, the familiar blue of the planet greeted them, a sight that brought a mix of relief and apprehension. The journey had been fraught with peril, but the true challenge would be ensuring the data led to actionable change, to prevent the shadows of conspiracy from growing deeper in the corridors of power. Back on Earth, General Harrow awaited their return, the gravity of the situation evident in his lined face. The data they brought back would ignite a series of strategic moves, chess pieces set in motion in a game where the stakes were nothing less than planetary peace. As the ship descended towards the military base, the sun broke over the horizon, a new dawn casting light on the dark intrigues they sought to unravel. As their ship cruised through the cold expanse of space, the small blue dot that was Earth began to grow larger in their viewport. Elias, Mason, and Dr. Voss watched in silence, each lost in their own reflections of the mission's weight and the information they carried. The ship's interior was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional beep from the console, creating a serene atmosphere that belied the intensity of their recent escape. "Once we land, there's no turning back," Mason said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, his eyes fixed on the Earth growing closer. "The evidence we've gathered will expose the corruption and the conspiracy. It will shake the very foundations of our governance on Mars and Earth." Elias nodded, his gaze shifting from the window to Mason. "It's about time. These shadows have lingered over us for too long. People deserve the truth." Voss, who had been quietly observing Earth's approach, added, "And they deserve leaders who serve not out of ambition, but out of a duty to those they lead. What we've done, what we're about to do, it's for every silent voice out there." The ship entered Earth's atmosphere, the hull groaning softly under the thermal stress as they descended. Flames licked the edges of the windows, a fiery barrier heralding their return from the cold darkness of space. The intensity in the cockpit was palpable, a stark contrast to the calm before the storm they were about to unleash. Upon landing, they were met not with hostility, but with an armed escort that led them straight to the military base's command center, a hive of activity where the air buzzed with urgent conversations and ringing phones. General Harrow was there to greet them, his expression grim yet relieved. "You've done well," Harrow stated firmly, extending a hand to each of them. "The data you've brought back is more than just intelligence. It's a catalyst for change. Let's ensure it's used correctly." They were quickly ushered into a secure briefing room where top military officials and government representatives waited. A large screen displayed the decrypted data, showing transactions, communications, and illegal arms shipments. The room fell silent as Elias stepped forward to speak, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elias began, his voice resonant, filling the room with its grave timbre, "what we have uncovered is not just a threat to our stability, it's a betrayal of every principle we hold dear. This conspiracy was designed to destabilize our colonies and profit from their chaos. But what these conspirators failed to understand is the resilience and the dedication of those who truly serve humanity." As Elias spoke, Mason distributed the evidence packets among the attendees, each file a testament to their harrowing journey and the truth they sought to uphold. Murmurs filled the room, each revelation another shockwave through the echelons of power. Voss took the floor next, her voice clear and unwavering. "These documents do not just reveal a plot against us. They highlight our vulnerabilities. We need reform, transparency, and accountability if we are to prevent such breaches of trust in the future." The discussion that followed was intense, with calls for immediate action and plans for sweeping reforms. Proposals were made, strategies formulated, and a commission was established to investigate further into the matter, with Voss nominated to lead due to her integral role and first-hand knowledge. As the meeting adjourned, Elias, Mason, and Voss stood together, a sense of accomplishment among them, though tempered by the knowledge of the difficult path ahead. "We started this as a rescue mission," Mason reflected, his gaze meeting those of his companions. "But it became much more. It's about asserting our humanity, our unyielding spirit to do what's right, even against overwhelming odds." Elias smiled, clapping Mason on the back. "And let this be a lesson to anyone who dares underestimate or exploit us. We're not just survivors. We're guardians of our future. Today we've shown that no shadow is too dark, no scheme too deep that we cannot overcome." The trio walked out of the command center together, stepping into the light of a setting sun that painted the sky with hues of fire and gold. In this light, they saw not an end, but a beginning, a new chapter where humanity stood vigilant, ready to defend its integrity and secure its destiny among the stars. Their journey had started with a simple objective, but it concluded with a profound realization. When humanity stands united, no force, no conspiracy, no darkness can prevail against it.